Thank you both very much. مساء الخير جميعاً، شكراً على مشاركتكم معنا. بتمنى تكونوا استمتعتوا بالمحادثات من الصباح. نقاشنا اليوم باللغة الإنجليزية وفيكم تتابعوا الترجمة بالعربي بالرابط بالشات، أكيد إيمان بعتته. So hello everyone, thank you very much for staying with us. It's been a long day, but it's been an amazing day so far. Thank you for joining me. My name is Dima Saber. I'm the Executive Director of Midan. We build tools and programs that allow journalists and civil society organizations to build knowledge together and collaborate. Our work is most meaningful in times of exceptions, so crisis, elections, democratic transitions, and we're currently working in about 60 countries across the larger world. I'm both grateful and very honored to be your moderator today. AI is increasingly determining what the world sees, reads, and believes about Palestine, not only through dramatic censorship, which has been very well evidenced and documented by Hamle and several other organizations, but through quieter mechanisms. What training data is treated as authoritative, how content moderation algorithms flag language, which sources search engines surface, and what chatbots say when they're asked about Palestine or about Gaza. We are speaking at a moment of cascading conflict. Since the US and Israel's war on Iran and Lebanon started, the information space has been flooded with AI-generated deepfakes, recycled footage, and coordinated disinformation. But here's what matters for our conversation today. US and Israeli information operations achieve their targets not only through fabricated content, but through narrative framing, through strategic omission, through media censorship, and the delegitimization of independent journalism. The same AI infrastructure that targets bodies in Gaza is shaping what the world is permitted to know about Lebanon today. And that infrastructure is what we're here to examine. Our session asked a fundamental question: who builds these AI systems and whose reality do they encode? I am very, very honored to introduce our three speakers. Dr. Timnit Gebru is one of the world's foremost voices on AI ethics. I'm extremely honored to be moderating this session with you today. And Structural Bias, formerly co-lead of Google's ethical AI team until her dismissal became a landmark moment in the politics of AI research. Timnit leads their institute, which she founded to center community-rooted, justice-oriented AI research. Your work asks not just, is this bias, but who benefits from building it this way? We also got Dr. Anwar Mahajne, who's an associate professor of political science at Stonehill College and a visiting scholar at the Center for Middle East Studies at Harvard. You specialize in feminist security studies, cybersecurity, and Middle Eastern politics. Your forthcoming article, Regulating Military AI, Gaza and Beyond, document in forensic detail how AI systems have been deployed in Gaza and how the architecture of US policy and private contracts has been structured to evade accountability. We also got Brendo Benifei, who is a member of the European Parliament and was a lead negotiator on the EU AI Act, which is the world's first comprehensive binding framework for AI regulation. He's been a consistent voice for including fundamental rights and human dignity in AI governance, and has been outspoken on the failure of big tech to take responsibility for harms in Palestine. Brendo wasn't able to join us today, so he has shared with us a video intervention, which we'll listen to together at the end of the panel. Please do share your observations and questions in the chat. I'll be very happy to pass them along to our skip speaker, Dr. Timnit. The floor is yours. Maybe a first suggestion is to think together about the architecture of bias, debunking the myth and obscurity of AI. Often we talk about it and it's just like big blurb that we don't really. So could you speak to us in plain terms about the power structures and incentives in AI development, who works at these companies that build these systems, whose perspectives are excluded, and how do profit motives shape what narratives get amplified?
Thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me? Okay? Okay, good. And thank you so much for moderating this this panel. So I want to start by saying that AI is a marketing term. So it's a marketing term that doesn't mean the same thing across time. So right now, when we say AI, most of the time we're thinking about chatbots like ChatGPT or Claude from Anthropic or things like that. But that wasn't always what AI meant. In the 80s, it's what people called expert systems. So it's this hodgepodge of different techniques or different products or different approaches to things or different models. So it's really a very nebulous term that kind of gets to mean whatever people want it to mean. And so that's the first thing I want to say. So as much as possible, I like to be very specific about what I'm saying when I say AI. So I use AI as a term that describes a bunch of different, as a field where there are a bunch of different methodologies. So for example, machine translation is sometimes called AI. Automatic speech transcription is also called AI, but also, ChatGPT is also called AI. The hate speech modeling system that someone uses in a social media platform can be called AI. So this is good to know because sometimes if we don't know what we're talking about when we say AI, it makes it harder to ground our discussions on what is harmful versus what's not harmful. So when I say that I don't like how certain things are being done with the AI industry, people might bring up some other kind of AI, which is, breast cancer detection or something like that, which is completely different from what we're talking about if we're talking about ChatGPT type image generation, video generation type systems. So that's the first thing I want to say. And this obfuscation is actually very helpful in all cases to the big tech companies that are pushing what they call AI, because generally speaking, what people think in the public consciousness when they say AI is some kind of super intelligent being, as if this thing is not being created by specific people or specific groups. So you can see that, for example, some of these big tech CEOs of companies like Anthropic, even, that is now being touted as the more ethical alternative to OpenAI, which I completely disagree with. Some of these CEOs are warning about their systems being super intelligent, or Anthropic even said that they can't confidently tell us that cloud is not conscious, right? And so then people praise them for warning about the dangers of their machines. But what happens is that this allows the companies to abdicate responsibility. So now when something is wrong, you're not asking how did Anthropic let this happen? How did OpenAI let this happen? What kind of processes broke down? Why did they build this kind of product that is causing this kind of harm? What kind of permits should not have, so for when a bridge collapses, you don't ask, was the bridge ethical? Did the bridge decide to collapse? Did the bridge feelings were hurt? These are not the questions you ask, right? You ask, was there a quid pro quo of some sort? Why was there not appropriate permits? What went wrong? This is what we would ask. But when we talk about AI, like this kind of being that comes on its own and has its own agency rather than something that's created by specific people and groups, then we are allowing these specific people and groups to abdicate responsibility. So instead of asking, how can this government official use this kind of automated killing machine to kill this many civilians, people start asking, how did this particular system called Lavender kill this many people, right? So it's a way to abdicate responsibility and say, no, it's the AI did it. So now that we have that out of the way, just like the most recent tools that are called AI, whether it is content moderation tools or chatbots, which people are using for as an information retrieval system, are kind of more pattern recognition machines that are trained from vast amounts of data on the internet. So if we ask ourselves what vast amounts of data on the internet is composed of, a lot of these systems are trained, for example, from Wikipedia pages or Reddit or some social media platforms, etc., at least from a few years ago. And most of, in my paper, I wrote a paper called Stochastic Parrots, which ended up getting me fired from Google a few years ago. One of the things we mentioned in that paper is that these points of view are hegemonic views. People who are marginalized either get bullied of these platforms or censored by governments, right? So most of this data consists of hegemonic views. But the prevailing sort of pretense is that because there's so much data that these systems are trained on, that they have to encompass a lot of different kinds of points of view in the world, which is not true. They encompass hegemonic views. A lot of people are not even on the internet, so their views are not encoded into these systems. The second thing that happens is they are they don't encompass changing points of view. They're very static. So for example, thoughts about what's going on in Palestine, the genocide, have evolved over time. What people think right now is not the same as people's level of awareness is not the same now than it was before. And that is seen with, if you look at the internet and text, you can see that, that those changing points of view. However, most of these systems are not trained on these kinds of changing points of view. Their points of view. They're trained on prior text that is static, and even the amount of data that shows these changing points of view is very small compared to all of the other data that these are trained on, that systems are trained on. So now you have, even when society is in a different place, these tools that we're talking about encode the past kind of biases. They don't move on as fast as society has moved on. On the other hand, even though that's what's happening, that's the case, what is a very dangerous situation that I think we're in right now is that, you know, at least with Google search or some kind of search engine, you look stuff up, you get a bunch of, and these already have issues. I'm not saying that they have issues, right? Especially Dr. Safiya Noble has written a book about Google called Algorithms of Oppression. So you look stuff up, you get a bunch of information. You can ask yourself where this information is coming from. Whereas with when you use chatbots as an information retrieval system, you're not even taking that one step of assessing where the information is coming from. You know, you get a bunch of options. You're like, well, I don't trust this source. I trust this source. Now you're getting one answer that is considered definitive. So we go back to whose answer is being considered definitive and who decides. All of these companies, first of all, have to answer to the U.S. government, and we, you know, we already know what that is. And secondly, we have to name the fact that for example, the division that I was fired from at Google now rolls up through an Israeli VP. And this is normal, right? Like the fact that they're in the IDF reserve, that's just normal, right? That's considered fine in the US. So these are the views, the points of views, and the political power structures that are being encoded. And I'm just going to spend the last minute talking about what it means to have community-rooted alternatives. First, I don't think we should take as a given that we have to have these kinds of chatbots, these kinds of systems that pretend to be all-knowing. Second, I believe that it's very important to build small, decentralized sort of systems and models. Even when you look at social media platforms, there's a lot of things that I find annoying about, for example, Mastodon or the Fediverse. But guess what? I run our own instance. We moderate ourselves. And there were so many people who reported me to myself for talking about Palestine anti-Semitism, because I'm talking about the genocide and the Palestinian genocide. So I kept that small social media platform, and I'm still on it because that's the only place where no one else, I don't answer to anyone else. We decide how to moderate ourselves. So I think more decentralized kind of systems like this are important.
Thank you, Timnit. We're going to move to a bit of more evidence now that we've had sort of a conversation around who makes them, whose agendas it is, the power that lies behind them. Maybe, Anwar, you can talk us through your research. It's very focused on specific AI systems. So you've looked a lot into Lavender, which Timnit has also mentioned, and Hasbora and Gospel, and going from facial recognition to using AI for targeting humans or mass assassinations. And in your research, you write a lot about how the very infrastructure of these systems encode assumptions about Palestinians as threats and are therefore used as a way to oppress and to target humans. So could you tell us a little bit about how does this system work, what your research has found, what evidence, but also mostly looking at the interconnectedness between something you work a lot about, which is the interconnectedness between the private companies, the US government, and the Israeli military, and how that translates into targeting actual humans on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you very much. My article with Survival was just published a few days ago. I shared the link with the private chat, but I'm happy to share the PDF with people who don't have access to it. I specifically focused on the use of AI in the military, and my article kind of starts talking about the general, right? We have a world right now where we're living into the AI arms race, right? We see Ukraine developing this, Russia using this, we see China developing this, specifically the competition between China and the US. And of course, Israel is one of the leading frontiers of testing AI systems. We also know the US has used AI systems in Venezuela, as well as now in Iran, and they're testing new weapons. Actually, somebody made this comment to me in a conversation where they're like, well, the reason why the war on Iran is happening is now we can actually test new toys, right? New toys as in new weapons that are powered by AI and new technologies. So we do have this global context, whereas there's this push to develop more AI, to build data centers, and incorporate that in the military. The cyberspace is considered the fifth domain, connecting everything, and AI is one of those tools that actually could create an umbrella connecting multiple domains of the military, gathering data from drones, social media, public use, to private intelligence, and creating profiles on people and kind of creating targets. So that understanding the context is very important, because now we know that there's this push for innovation over regulation. And we heard with the transition from the Biden administration to the Trump administration, of course, we can critique the Biden administration for a lot of things, as well as like the regulations were lax, etc. But we see this heavy push to counter what they call woke AI, right? With the transition. Woke AI is any push to make sure that these AI systems, like any bias is being filtered, or they're like mechanisms to address those issues. And now in the military, of course, when you have access to massive amount of data and the claim of precision, then you're using that as an excuse. So what happens is those AI systems are being marketed in the military. Again, specifically, I know Timnit talked about different types of AI and the way they evolve. For me, I'm focused on these tools that are being used in the military to identify targets, also assess kind of operational kind of logistics, when to target, how much munition do you need to target, etc. So there's a variety of ways that these AI systems are being used in the military. We have drones that are powered by AI systems as well. Of course, there's discussion about autonomous weapons. So if you have a drone, let's say, collecting data, the AI system is like, okay, there's a target, I identified the target, should the AI be able to target without any human approval? Now, that's an easy thing to regulate, because a lot of people are against autonomous weapons that are powered by AI. And I want to clarify that autonomous weapons don't have to have AI to work. Like a landmine is an autonomous weapon. Somebody steps on it and it gets activated. But it is important to understand that these discussions at the international level, it has been very hard to discuss regulating these systems. And the other thing is, because of that push for innovation competition, the AI arms race between major powers has allowed a lot of countries to do a lot without any ethical frameworks, specifically in the military arena. I know we can look at the EU as different than the US and other contexts. But then the argument of precision. Now, a lot of people who are proponent of AI, incorporating AI in the military, the same argument with the drones, etc., is that if you incorporate as much data as possible, you can use this data to claim that the targets, that with confidence, these targets are militant. But it does not address a few things. One, if the rules of engagement allows for heavy civilian deaths, and you are going to do it, let's say, okay, I'm going to allow for one Hamas militant, even with a high confidence that it is a militant, let's say 100 or 200 civilians, right? So you have thousands of targets within the first 2 weeks. How many civilians are we talking about, right? Second, it's the fact that even with a human operator approving these targets, how much time do you have to really review the data and approve it? And then the third element, if I'm a biased human being, if I see a Palestinian male, a certain age, or a woman, a certain age, and then for me, that is a confirmation bias. The AI tool becomes and serves as a confirmation, like to serve my confirmation bias, where I approve very quickly, and then use the facade of datafication in order to protect myself when it comes to these systems. So we have multiple layers that are infused within this, and we're going to see these AI systems being exported across, it's going to change warfare, the way we know warfare. And then we can maybe discuss regulations as well a little bit if I have time. One of the tricky things about these AI tools and the way why a lot of companies in the US are like Microsoft, Google, Amazon are heavily involved with the Israeli military is these AI tools are not labeled as weapons. And the US has frameworks to discuss exports of weapons, but if these AI tools are assisted or like they're dual use, so they're used for civilian purposes or as supportive systems rather than actual weapons, then they circumvent a lot of these regulatory frameworks. Now, I am not naive, and I know with the whole Anthropic Department of Defense or war discussion that shows even that the military itself doesn't want to regulate, and there's no interest. But the fact that these tools are labeled differently also means that they circumvent a lot of the regulations that already exist, and also makes it harder to create new regulations to regulate these weapons. So now with these regulations, like kind of now who's interested in regulating them, at what level? States are not interested in regulating them. Companies are not interested in regulating them. And then what happens at the international level? Because if the states are not interested, then there's no push internationally to regulate these weapons as well. So I think these are important things to pay attention to, and all the data that is being fed, like it's kind of it's just taking structures of oppression that already exist, putting data and like this distancing from it, like, oh no, we're not biased anymore, and justifying those systems, right? And allowing them to exist at the guise of neutrality. And I can pause here and then we'll continue the conversation.
That's great. Thank you, Iman. And I think when we're going to show Brando's video, it does look a little bit about gaps in regulatory processes and what we can do about it. I want to, maybe it's a question for both of you, and I do want to encourage, thank you for those putting the comments in the chat. Please give us all the questions you have. We'll pass them on. So you've both talked in different ways about how big tech basically does everything they can to circumvent accountability. So they set up proper hostile environment for accountability. When it comes to Palestine specifically, what does that hostility looks like? Are we talking about active suppression? Is it more diffuse way to do it? I'm opening the floor. Please jump in, whoever would like to. Maybe Timnit, you can go first. I know you. You're muted.
Oh, you would think after all these years I know how to unmute myself, but I don't. I think it's on all fronts. So it's like the censorship is on all fronts. My friend Ariel Corin, she was pushed out of Google for uncovering Project Nimbus, the partnership that Google has with the Israeli military, right? And so first they kind of denied that this had anything to do with the military, and then they just sort of, made her life miserable slowly, and then they pushed her out. So this is one specific way in which you're pushed out. The other ways is they even censored the word genocide, the entire word genocide, so that to make sure that people don't even discuss it. In the Silicon Valley ecosystem, it's been for many years that even just saying the word Palestine means that your career is over. So it becomes this kind of taboo setting of narratives. I know we're talking about setting the narrative in AI, but also just in real life, right? It also it becomes, what is acceptable to say and do, and who's in charge and who's not in charge. Like I mentioned, the VP of my division that I was in at Google is an Israeli from Tel Aviv, and he can just be called up to the IDF reserves, and that's okay, right? So the suppression and censorship, I think, of workers happens at all levels. But then, of course, I know that Hamla has been talking and writing about the kinds of censorship that happen on social media platforms as well, and all of these other platforms.
Yeah, so I want to see if I can show this video. I'm going to try to do it. I sent the link on Instagram, but it is a video marketing Firefly drone, which it's kind of like showing a target in Gaza and how the drone is finding a target and attacking. Let me see if I can do it.
You said it's a marketing video?
Yes. So, okay, can you see my screen? Which screen do you can see? Sorry, let me, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, awesome. So do you see this
No,
video?
we can't see it yet.
Not yet. Sorry.
Not yet. Okay, so share screen. Oh, share screen. How about now?
We can't see it. I don't know. Maybe you can send someone, you can send it.
Do you want to send it to Brahim?
Yeah.
We can see it now.
Yeah.
We can
Okay.
bet it's okay. Yes.
Do you see the video now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the video where Raphael kind of used to promote the Spike Firefly drone that is using AI tool to identify targets. So look, it's showing a target in Gaza. It's a person walking, and they're using that as a marketing strategy, right? It's showing the target going and then the drone attacking. And in this sense, if we're talking not just about, we're talking about military companies, and I'm going to stop share now. I can share the video with somebody who's interested. But they're not ashamed at all from doing that. They're not even hiding it. They're using it as a marketing tool right now in Gaza. And we know, like, we're talking about military companies affiliated with the IDF, but these companies have heavy involvement with Silicon Valley companies, and they're using their technologies, right? We know, for instance, from reporting by Plus 972 magazine, that Microsoft agents were embedded within the Israeli military. They needed the cloud services from companies outside of the military because their system crashed with the amount of data they're collecting on Palestinians, and they're training their systems on Palestinian data. So I don't think there's any shame or kind of like this idea of, oh, maybe we should censor ourselves because the Palestinians are actually actively marketing these tools to outside militaries. And we see these technologies are being used as a diplomacy tool to promote normalization agreements and peace agreements, etc. And that's kind of just justifying the killing. And if you use the label terrorist and like just post it on there, right, then the human is gone, and it's an easy label to use, and has been used against Palestinians. So I don't think there's any kind of any effort to hide that at all in multiple contexts.
I just want to add to what you just said, that it's the complete opposite. It's not even, there's no effort to hide it, but anybody who says what you just said, that they're the ones who are attacked. So some of my colleagues and collaborators wrote this paper analyzing all of these kind of research papers that are published in the most famous computer vision. So computer vision is a subset that of AI that deals with images and videos. And for example, target face recognition, gait recognition, pedestrian detection, this is under computer vision. And so they analyzed the papers published in this conference called CVPR. It's the largest and most famous conference, academic conference in that arena in the US. And they showed that so many of them were used for surveillance. And this paper, that someone was kind of presenting this paper at a workshop, and there was one slide that said how CVPR research, or I don't remember exactly, is used in the genocide in Palestine. And this Israeli person that was on in the audience took a screenshot and harassed this academic on Twitter, and it was a whole, back to old Twitter, and it was a whole thing. And this academic is looking for a job, right? And all of these professors were openly saying, university professors saying not to hire this academic because they said this, and they're on a list, right? So it's just so openly not okay to even name this genocide among the people whose works are then embedded in all of these companies that we're talking about. Before someone's work gets into Google or ChatGPT or whatever, it is presented at these kinds of conferences.
I wanna close the loop on accountability, because I think it's a really important topic. Then we'll take a question from the floor. So Anwar, you make it clear how the regulatory gap isn't accidental. That by by presenting these as arms control and creating this narrative around them, it just allows them to bypass congressional scrutiny, any kind of scrutiny. The Trump administration, not that we're expecting much of it, but we know it has moved towards more and more deregulation. So our question becomes, who regulates? What can the EU do something? Like, what would a proper addressing of this regulatory gap look like? And is there space, Timnit, for community-centered contributions to regulation? What can civil society organizations do? What can think tank like DARE do to address this gap?
Anwar, you want to take this one first?
Yeah. Listen, I've had this with some of my European colleagues about regulations, the GDPR, the Digital Service Act, the AI. Think about it. We have a system where a lot of the innovation is happening in the West, in Silicon Valley. A lot of the regulations are happening in the EU. I think when I was in Ireland, my cab driver was like, the US innovates, the EU regulates, and then China emulates. I don't know if that's like saying that people are endorsing, but we see that it's heavily focused on the West. Even with the regulations, they don't understand the cultural context, the political context. So the EU focuses heavily on states and kind of, on users' responsibility, the ability of users to be able to identify and report, etc. But if you don't know, if your state is a source of insecurity, right? If a state is considered democratic and our ally, but they're committing human rights abuses, right? If the people we're addressing are minorities, these regulations are not really made for them. They do not take them into account. Any state-centric view of regulations tells us that we really don't understand how these states operate and who's being oppressed and who's not, who's going to benefit and who's not. And I think this is one of the main things with regulations, is like, we do need a grassroots effort to push a more international kind of coordination to regulate, that also questions the state as the source of insecurity rather than the place to kind of force these private companies to pay attention to or take responsibility for the products that they're making. I had a conversation with a tech CEO, and I can't mention which company it's because it was an off-the-record conversation. But, they're telling me, oh, actually, we would still be able to compete with China with regulations, but I can't say that out loud, right? Even themselves, they know that. So why don't you take that accountability itself without being pushed by governments? And governments are not interested. So I think because we are the product of this, if we find ways, and even though it's hard to because we're so reliant on these technologies, to push for more accountability, then that's where I think the hope comes from. I don't trust states. I am very skeptical. I don't trust private companies. Somebody brought up the example of how cars before, like when they manufactured cars, they didn't care about safety. We didn't have car seats, we didn't have the seat belt, we didn't have all that. Other innovators, other counter companies and counter initiatives came in to push for these, and of course, unfortunately, it probably took a number of deaths before that happened. But we do need that grassroots initiatives.
That's also the other problem, is that we also know that they were mostly made for men and not for
exactly.
So
so it's important to kind of problematize to these frameworks that already exist, even though they're helpful, of course, but they're still not made for the people who are going to suffer the most out of them.
I'll go one step farther and say, even see how cars were created, why we even have cars in the first place, rather than trains or something else as the public mode, the dominant mode of transportation. It's because these companies maneuvered, changed laws, put governments in their pockets. And that's the same thing that's happening with all of this AI infrastructure that is being built, right? It doesn't have to be part of the fabric of everyone's life, just like cars are right now. It didn't have to be that way. They're sort of pushing it down everyone's throats, right? And so this assumption that, I would say actually that this assumption that, Anthropic and OpenAI, et cetera, are the innovators and everybody else is the naysayer, I don't think it's true at all, because they position themselves as the innovators, but they're actually pillaging and exploiting, and they're allowed to do it, and they have untold amounts of money, and other people are being exploited and they're being divested from. And so I think what we need to do with respect to this, your question, Dima, about community centered initiatives is I think that like waiting for something bad to happen and then thinking about regulation retroactively is just a lost cause, because we're always behind. And also we shouldn't trust the state. Everybody acts to pressure. Even regulation is a response to pressure. So if they see where the public's is going, and then maybe they'll change their regulation. And of course, even with the EU AI Act, if you see where the carve-outs are, or what part is not really regulated, it's exactly the kind of parts that the systems that oppressing Palestinians are being exported, right? The same tools that are being used against Palestinians are exported against migrants, for instance, in Europe, and that part is not covered by the EU AI Act. So it's a loophole that we can't depend on. I would say that we, at least at DARE, we have Isra Al-Shafi, who's a Bahraini you know her, okay, researcher. She created Surveillance Watch, right? Which we have this project called Surveillance Watch, which is watch the watchers, empower people with information. Because what they do is a lot of these funders, for example, venture capitalists, etc., they hide their funding to all of these different horrible companies through shell companies and all of that, and we're trying to make that visible. But of course, depending on what the state decides, the state can just decide to make that kind of activity illegal also, right? So I think these are the kinds of things we can proactively do. We can proactively reject and make sure that some of these tools are not in our everyday lives, like plastic or something, right? That they're not that we can't go about our lives without them. So I think any kind of friction that we can create for that is useful as well.
I'm going to suggest that we actually watch Brando's video now, because it is very much about regulation, and I want us to end the conversation on something a little bit more hopeful than regulation.
Okay.
So, if you don't mind, just let us listen to Brando's message from the EU Parliament, and then we'll pick it up together here.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I hope I can bring a perspective from here, from the European Parliament, to this crucial debate about Palestinian digital narratives and how we see technology being used to influence the debate and the image of Palestinian identity, the conflicts, unfortunately, the genocide we have seen happening in Gaza, and the history of occupation and exploitation that we know about. And personally, I've seen very closely by traveling to West Bank and to East Jerusalem more than one time in the past years. And I want to thank you again for this occasion to debate, and I hope my contribution will be useful somehow. My name is Brando Benifei. I'm a parliamentarian of the European Parliament since 2014, and I've been working a lot on digital files, digital issues, and artificial intelligence. The AI Act is the European regulation on artificial intelligence that I've been negotiating myself. And I want to go straight to the point. In fact, this legislation, that is a kind of point of reference globally on how we regulate AI, is also dealing with crucial topics like mass surveillance, exploitation of personal data, discriminations, all issues that I think are close to what can be the experience of a Palestinian when looking at the use of AI, the abuses of AI that we have seen also in, unfortunately, in war context, in military influence situations. I'm saying this because, in fact, this legislation, as all kind of legislation dealing with digital for the European Union, is not dealing with the military uses. In fact, that's an area that is only limitedly touched by this kind of legislation. And so I want to go straight to the point. When we talk about the use of these instruments for the military use in war zones and also in civilian context where in fact military technologies are being used, that's the case for many Palestinians. Well, we need global standards, we need global rules, because we are lacking a common understanding like the one we have been able to build in the years when we look at nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, rights of prisoners in war. Although I know very well that even those important safeguards and rules, even in the context of conflicts, they have been sometimes violated and misused. So when we look more specifically at the narrative issue, well, we know that there has been a lot of manipulation. And I have seen also the case of the so-called shadow banning. We have seen the case of people talking about Palestinian affairs, Palestinian issues being censored by the platforms. And we have seen manipulation through AI that has been used to attack the Palestinian people. This is part of the disinformation that is being used in civilian and military contexts, and that is AI powered today. We need to be clear. AI is used to fuel disinformation and shaping narratives. That already, we have to be clear, is something when we look at the digital ecosystem. It's shaped by the global north, it's shaped by many actors that are coming from a certain number of countries, and that has for sure seen the exclusion of the Palestinian point of view. So Palestinians are also being touched by something that they haven't contributed to build in any way. But as the AI Act has been able to develop forms of control over AI-generated content on contrasting the misuse of AI content for disinformation, for violence, for humiliation, this is an ongoing process of applying these rules in Europe, but also we have seen the lack, again, and I go back to what I was saying earlier, of global standards that are being applied. So in my opinion, it's very important, and I thank you for doing it, that you study the way the digital narrative, the digital point of view is being represented when looking at the Palestinian identity and the history and the present of the Palestinian people. Because we see that on one end, if we want to bring a more positive aspect and note, the social media platforms, although there has been censorship and shadow banning, as I was mentioning earlier, have been able to show the situation on the ground when we look at the facts of the last years in a way that was not possible before, in a way that was very different when we looked at previous phases in the history also of the Palestinian people. I think this is very important, but at the same time, the manipulation, the abuses are easier. So we need to build instruments so that we can ring fence what we think should be protected, but we can only do that as much as there are rules applied in a certain space. As I said, we lack a global effort in this, and this should be our direction. But also, we need to build more debate and more critical approach to this, so that people can understand the manipulations when they happen, and they can build a point of view that is autonomous. I think this is very important, and this means we need to build more literacy in how we deal with the digital narratives, how we look at them. And this is especially important when we look at the Palestinian narratives. I think that the AI Act can be a very important reference point. As I said, it has safeguards, it has antibodies, I would say, against manipulation and oppression and discrimination. But it has the limit of being, on one hand, opposed by certain forces, private and public, I would say, that are trying to reduce the implementation, to limit the implementation, but also we lack the global dimension. It's true that at a global level, as I said earlier, and I want to conclude on this note, AI Act is a reference point, but then in terms of being applicable, in being able to enact protections outside of Europe, it's not able to do that because there is a limit, obviously, of its efficacy. So I think it's extremely important that we continue this debate, that we build alliances at the global level to contrast manipulation, misinformation, and to defend the dignity and the truth around Palestinian people. I think the digital space is a space that should not be left alone. It should be looked into, it should be object of critique, and it should be regulated. And this is what we try to do from here, with the possibility, hopefully, to build a more robust global action. And we need to acknowledge that the involvement of Palestinian people will be more and more important if we want to actually be able to understand even some of these problematics that might not be obvious to an eye from Europe. So involvement of the subjects that are in the narrative is extremely important, and this is also something that we are discussing about, how to strengthen the involvement of the affected people when we look at the deployment of these digital technologies. So it's a lot of different issues on the table, but we are working on it in the European Union, and I want to express again my gratitude and support for this work that has to continue in the spirit of exchange and of building a more just and democratic world. I think we really need that today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening, everyone. I wish Brenda was here because it would have been a really interesting conversation about, do we let state and the EU regulate, and what have we learned from, because, you know, the regulation conversation didn't just come up with AI. We've been talking about regulating for the last 20 years. We've been talking about involving the voices of the represented in the narratives about their lives and their death and their resistance for 20 years. So maybe another occasion, hopefully. But our session asked in the title, who trains the machine? That talk about Palestine to the word. But maybe I want to try and end our session on a more hopeful note. I'm Lebanese, and I'm trying right now to look for any tiny bits of hope anywhere I can find them. So I'm hoping I can get this from you. Timnit, you said we don't have to accept that these machines are legitimate sources of knowledge at all. And I absolutely buy into this. We have questions from the audience that I tried to synthesize about ethical AI research, about positive uses of AI, about Palantir, and what civil society can do to counter AI use in healthcare systems, whether resisting normalization of AI in everyday life is even a realistic question. So in a future that could be ours, my question to you is, how do we resist? We have a few minutes to dream and organize together. And so I'd like to open the floor first to Anwar, and I'll let Timnit end the session. Anwar, how do we resist?
How do we resist? I think grassroots civil society activism across the globe, like it has to be interconnected and networked. Of course, this requires, building coalitions across language, geographic locations, etc. And I have hope. I mean, we've seen on the Palestinian side, like new apps are emerging, new technologies are emerging. People are trying to design it in ways like grassroots AI initiatives or tools that are being built. And listen, I do like the idea of not relying on AI as a day-to-day tool, but let's be real as well. People who are using it are going to have advantage over people who are not using it. And those people who are not using it are also disadvantaged as well. So I don't know if, like, I do want to go behind not using it, but if you have, I'm thinking about, let's say in terms of, I'm a professor and I have two students, one student who comes from a marginalized background and one who's not. And one is using AI and knows how to use AI and gets a job at a company where he knows to use AI, and the other person is refusing to use that, of course, a variety of valid reasons, environmental, ethical, you name it. Then it's going to maintain that system and allow it to prosper. And that's unfortunate, but that's where we are today. And I know, Timnit, you might have a different perspective on that. For me, I see the hope in civil society. And when it comes to Palantir, I don't know if you want me to address that. Like, I mean, Palantir, their data comes from government and commercial, like they're getting private data, intelligence, etc. And that's how they're training their AI system. And don't even get me started on Alex Carr. Like, he framed it as a war between the West and East, the civilized and uncivilized. He outwardly said that, made a lot of comments about women. I mean, you can, I don't want to even start because that's going to ruin the hope thing.
On a positive note, what are you doing?
I made the mistake of reading his book. I mean, I'm glad I read it because
you can't mention Palantir and then ask us to end on a hopeful note.
But we're resisting Palantir, aren't we? Like, that is one that I am part of many groups that are actually being efficient at getting Palantir out of like our healthcare system. So I thought maybe that framing would work. How do we resist? Are you going to tell us how we resist?
Oh, is it me? Is it my turn now? Sorry. Okay, yes. So Anwar, I completely agree that it's hard to make this an individual person to individual person choice. I mean, I was talking to some professors in the law school saying that even if their students don't want to use these chatbots or whatever, they're being asked at job interviews what to do. And so, but I think that collectively, so for example, in the US, unions can collectively have a different sort of contract bargaining power or something. I think that's the way to resist and not put it on the individual who is going to be disadvantaged. But also, I mean, imagine a lot of students who are just cheating their way through school are not going to be at an advantage. It's going to take a little bit of time to stabilize, but I don't really think that, the decline of cognitive skills is not a good thing for us. But in terms of resisting, I mean, when I look for hope, I usually look for what the people who are being most impacted are doing, self-organizing. I mean, you're in Lebanon, and I work with an organization that is created by Ethiopian migrant workers in Lebanon for themselves, by themselves, and they've been doing incredible work. In this AI ecosystem, we have a project called the Data Workers Inquiry Project, and it's a bunch of data workers. We talk about data powering these systems, and behind the data are workers who are either filtering the data, providing the data, content moderators, etc. And they are some of the most exploited and traumatized people with this rise of this kind of ecosystem. And they have been researching and writing and kind of producing content about their conditions in the modalities that they want, whether it is documentaries or reports or anything. And then they created the Data Labelers Association that is advocating on their own behalf. And my hope is more on those kinds of groups before politicians, because they are the ones who then change the public consciousness that then changes the regulation, right? Regulation, I think, comes way after. There are data poisoning mechanisms. There are people supporting artists and by, for example, having them instead of, if you don't want your art to be mimicked or your style to be mimicked, you can poison it using a particular methodology and then make it harder. And this is what I mean by adding friction, right? And so I think that there are people resisting data centers. And also I imagine,
I'm really sorry, I have to interrupt because we are at time and I'm getting, but hopefully we can, yes, to more hyperlocal, grassroots, South-South collaboration and knowledge building. Thank you so much for the gift of your time. I'm sorry I had to.
No problem. Thank you for having us.
On the chat. Thank you to everybody who is listening, and we'll see you in the remaining of today and a full day tomorrow as well. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you so much.